Good afternoon, everyone. I'm just trying to get my screens organised. There we go. Thanks for joining, everybody. It's 12 o'clock on Friday again. These Fridays are whizzing by. Today, we've got a really good session on culture. A little bit of background to these sessions. I started them about 9 weeks ago, maybe, and we started on some hot topic type agenda items, and we'd have a panel and just discuss these issues. And then people started to ask whether we could focus on solutions so we could be a bit more positive and proactive rather than just having a whinge. So that's what we've started to do over the last month. And it feels like they're going really well, and we're getting more and more requests for these things. So I'm really pleased with the way things are shaping up. So the quick introduction is we'll do a quick round robin, a quick 60-second introduction, and then Matthew and Andrew will talk through their slides and their solution. And then all the way through this, on LinkedIn, you can contribute into our stage, if you like, through the comments in LinkedIn. We can see them come through as they do. So I really encourage you to feedback and keep us going with questions and those sorts of things as we present. There is an extra little thing that we're running with Insight Genie, which is a tool to help us collect qualitative insights really quickly and easily. So I'm just quickly going to show you that so you guys know how easy it is and you can contribute to it and help us as we go through the session. This will help us because we want to constantly improve. So as you're looking at the solution, if you think there's things that you can help us with, please share what your thoughts are and your insights are. That'll be fantastic. So let me just share screen. And this is the one. So there's a link in, am I on the right one there? It's not showing me. I think it's that one. There's a link in the comments within LinkedIn, and that will just take you straight through to this page. So with this one, you're going to confirm that you will not put any personal information in, and it's just showing you that we are using AI for this, but it doesn't store any of your information or use it to train itself. It's just purely to help us consolidate and make sense of your feedback. So you'll click on that link and you'll come through, and please tell us, what do you think? What are the strengths and weaknesses to the solution? What improvements can we make? What else do we need to know or research in order for us to make the best possible solution for everybody so that we can ultimately reform the public services the way we want to? So I'm going to come back to our session. So I'll do a quick 60 seconds, then hand on to Andrew, then hand on to Matthew, and then Matthew can start with the session. So hi, everybody. My name's Anthony Lawton. I'm the founder of Fit to Care and Insight Genie. I'm a public sector advisor, and my passion is to bridge that gap between senior managers and the front line, because that's where I think all the value is, and that's where we can reduce a lot of waste, improve well-being, and really make stuff really happen. AI is a big part of what I do to industrialize that process and make it a lot easier for us. But I absolutely know and understand that without the right culture, it doesn't matter what technology we've got, it will not work. So the culture is absolutely key. So that's my little intro. I will just pass you over to Andrew, and somebody just commented that the link's not working. So I'll try and put that back in again whilst you guys do the intros.
Thank you very much, Anthony, and fab to meet you. And hello, Liz. Thanks for the feedback on the link. So I'm a GP by background and went through sort of a clinical leadership type program into sort of organisational leadership and management, and picked up the responsibility for a couple of CCGs when they were a thing. So I've been on quite a sort of leadership journey, and that's exposed me to lots of management thinking theories, all of those kind of things. And I met Matthew about 7 years ago. When we were doing some work together in the commissioning organisation, but also then continued that relationship through a youth justice board where we managed to sort of reduce sort of criminalisation of young kids. And he sort of discussed this model with me, and it really resonated with some of the gaps that I thought I'd had experienced over that. And we've been able to work together and really sort of like try and close off some of those gaps and get real solutions for people. So that is me.
I'm Matthew Adam, and I'm a psychotherapist, systemic psychotherapist by background, but I've been working closely with organisations for the last seven or 8 years. But I've always been interested in the way that teams and organizations work, how they interact together. Over the years, I've developed ideas about how to work effectively with them, and that's where the 5x5 models developed, is through some of my consultancy work. So we'll hope to talk about that today in a meaningful way, so you'll get a good idea about what it is that we think is a solution to culture.
Brilliant. So you ready for the slides?
Ready for the slides.
Okay, so that's it. Let's just up on screen. Let's get back to the first slide rather than the last one.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay.
So we could probably go straight to slide 4, I think, because we've done our introductions.
Yeah, perfect.
So we want to sort of think about culture today, because culture is something that all organizations have, whether it's intentional or unintentional. And the distinction for us about an unintentional culture is it's a culture that is not often thought about or discussed together. And that can lead to bigger problems, because if we're not thinking about culture, it doesn't mean it's not being created. But over the years, I've found one of the difficulties with culture is really being able to define it, being able to say what exactly it is. And so in order for us to be able to shape an intentional culture, we have to be able to understand that. But before we do, we have to think about what are the problems of an unintentional culture. So can we have the next slide?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we looked at different models, and I'd come across this in my management journey, Lencioni's models, 5 dysfunctions of teams. And when you look at these are all about relationships. And those relationships build up a culture. And I think we've all been in circumstances where we might have been in meetings where people haven't felt able to speak or haven't necessarily wanted to pick up sort of actions, and then there's been no follow-up, so things haven't progressed, and at the next meeting there isn't any consequence. And those are all sort of really, really visible signs that there's some form of dysfunction going on. And that is usually a cultural issue that's underpinning that. So a lot of what we've focused on, Matthew and I discussed, is how do we start to sort of do things that are reproducible to help with those dysfunctions. And I think Lencioni's work is absolutely brilliant, and it gives some pointers and hints, but there's never been a set of structured solutions to get that right. So what we wanted to do was produce a dynamic framework that would connect things together and help people engage with what their culture is, how that's formed, and what they need to do. So, and that's where Matthew started, and that's what kind of got me involved in it, because it sparked my interest, because it started to fix problems that I'd been sort of like doing individually, but never had a real set process to go, okay, if we've got these kind of things going on, what do we do? So tell us a bit more, Matthew.
Yeah, so I think probably the next slide now, Anthony. So if we're thinking about how do we address some of these dysfunctions that exist in teams, well, we have to have a solution. And over the course of my work, it comes back to relationships. Relationships are absolutely fundamental. And so we can have good relationships in the workplace. We can have bad relationships in the workplace. Can we have productive relationships in the workplace? How do we harness those relationships to deliver high performance? And a big part of this is thinking about how is it that we interact together. So the 5x5 solution that we've come up with addresses many of those dysfunctions just through the relationships and how you start to have conversations about what direction are we going in, what purpose are we working towards, what's meaningful about the way that we work together, are we working on the same things, are we aligned, are we misaligned? I think a big aspect of culture is about being aligned to the organization's vision. And I've worked in many organizations where many of the colleagues or employees don't know what they couldn't speak about the vision. So we need to start thinking about alignment. Go to the next slide, Anthony.
Yeah, so when you're doing that, those solutions, we call them the essential functions. And you don't necessarily need to start at the bottom and work up with this, although it is all about intentional culture. It's all connected. So is there anything that we could do to help people know where to start, basically, on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it really depends on the context that you're coming from. So as you say, it's not a linear model. This is not something that you start at the top and you work to the bottom, or it can be used as required. So if we think about the 5 essential team functions, we're focusing on an intentional culture, but that can develop if we're thinking about how do we introduce or create psychological safety, or how do we, through a process of setting goals together, how do we start to move towards improved alignment or sort of increased levels of trust, which at the end of the day will lead to an intentional culture if you're thinking about it. It's where we're not thinking about it that's the problem, and having clear starting points for addressing these things is important. And I think that's what's been missing, is where do we start with culture? But how can we start thinking about our culture if we don't really truly define it? And I think that's part of the issue. I spent years trying to think about what is culture and how do we start to define it? And I started to explore it in some ways. And I remember I was in a presentation and I was talking about culture, and I defined it as 4 distinct things. And there was an anthropologist, unknown to me, there was a social anthropologist in the audience. And when I defined it, she said, that's actually very accurate. She said, it's so difficult to define, but you've done a good job. So I was really pleased with that. So the next slide will define that. So culture consists of 4 things. It's a set of rules, and that can be organizational rules, team rules. It's a set of shared beliefs and values. And that can be sort of between individuals, colleagues, but also with shared beliefs and values with the organization. It's a way of behaving. It's a way that we the things that we do, we call those the norms. But it's also a way of relating to each other. And if we start to think of it in these terms, simplifying in such a way that it becomes almost something we can get at, it's no longer this nebulous idea of, well, we don't know what culture is, we just want to try to shape it. We can start to dissect it in more detail.
That's really, really good. Really interesting. It's just made me realize in my book, Matthew, the Fit to Care book, I don't know if I've sent you a copy yet, but I must do. These 4 things are absolutely embedded within the precepts that I've built within the book. So for me, I wrote down earlier, where do we start with culture? For me, it's those precepts, and the ones that I've written absolutely encompass all 4 of those things. It feels like, wow, that's a completely perfect fit. It'd be great I'll send it to you afterwards, just so you can have a look at the precepts and go, no, that I get it.
Well, this is it, though, isn't it? I mean, if you simplify it in these terms, it suddenly becomes something we can discuss and we can name it. We can say, actually, it's not okay to be rude to people.
Yeah.
Is there a rule that says that's permissible? Is that where the avoidance of accountability comes in, where it's like, actually, it's not acceptable? Andy, have you got any thoughts you wanted to add to this?
Yeah, I mean, probably bouncing forward a bit, because we sort of like put a bit more meat on the bones of those 4 underlying rules. So if we can go on to the next slide, Anthony, that'd be great. So there's lots of other people who've come at culture in different ways and sort of defined it in different ways. We've got those 2 principles there. And I think for me, there's the observable things, the artifacts and symbols. So artifacts and symbols would be things that you notice when you walk into a building. And this thing about alignment and culture emerging, or culture being intentional, if you have a culture of openness and creativity, but everybody's working behind gated doors and in individual cubicles, the artifacts there don't really match with that. And you might find that people are in their own headspace a lot, and it starts to shape the way people behave, which then will create an unintentional culture because we haven't thought about the environment that people are in. So it goes deeper than just some of the behaviors, and that's what the artifacts and symbols things are. The assumptions are things that people carry that might be unspoken beliefs, unspoken rules. And they're a bit more difficult to get at, but they're the kind of things that might be discussed in small subgroups or amongst people, but we don't tell the bosses, or we don't share that openly in meetings. And those are actually the things that will drive things forward. And unless there is real commitment to shared values and beliefs, there won't be any alignment there. So it's really important to get all those things lined up and make sure that the environment, the ways that you work, the permissions that people have are all appropriate and aligned. And we'll come on to how to do that as break down the 5x5 model and the 5 essential functions.
Brilliant. I don't want to slow you down too much, but just on that assumptions piece, do you believe, like me, that a lot of this is driven by the actual behaviors of the leaders around the organization? So you can have the things, the signs on the wall and all these sort of things, but actually if the leaders don't live like that, those assumptions underneath are, well, this is all nice and good, but actually the reality is something completely different, and it's really led by some of those key leaders and how they work and how they behave. And
absolutely, Anthony, and that leads us to the culture vision gap, which is where you've got leaders who may say one thing and do something else. I was working with a team where there was a zero tolerance bullying policy, and it was quite clear that there was no bullying, except one of the directors was a self-appointed bully. She seemed to revel in being a bulldog, and she called herself that. And loads of people were off sick. But when this was raised or as a concern, it was, we have a zero tolerance bullying policy, which is a rule. We don't do that, but yet we do. So I think the next slide kind of goes into this vision culture gap, which is really important, because if you unintentionally undermine what it is you're doing or how you behave, the broad basic assumption is one of distrust. It's like, well, we can't believe what you say and do. It doesn't match. So why should we trust the organization? Why should I bother? And if we start to distrust our leaders, or we start to distrust the alignment towards a vision, then we start you'll start to see a lack of commitment. So you can already start to see, just through this alone, the basic assumptions, we potentially move into identifying some of those 5 dysfunctions.
Yeah. And it's like when things are going well, it feels energized, it feels comfortable, and you feel secure. And it's when things challenge those assumptions and beliefs that you've got through the conduct or observed behaviors, that's really impactful, and particularly from leadership, most impactful, because role modeling those things is really, really important. There's lots of articles of that, and one recently in Harvard's Business Journal just about those things. And they also looked at, where does dysfunction exist? 70% of our teams and organisations have at least one of the dysfunctions that Lencioni described, and if you've got one, you've probably got more. And that struck me as a massive parallel between change, sort of, and large-scale project failure, which I think the rate is about 3/4 fail. So there's a big parallel there about being able to intentionally deliver goals and change, and having a highly functioning team and organisation that celebrates diverse ideas and all of those things, provides a nice secure base, psychological safety, and enables people to deliver. But yeah, there's some great comments coming through. So I'm glad.
I just thought I'd share that one just to give people a sense of, it feels like the audience is agreeing with us. A lot of agreement going on.
Great. So now we think about the solutions, don't we? Because it sounds like there's recognition that these are difficulties. So the solutions are going to be based in relationships, as we said before, because one of the most important things, but one of the first things to go is thinking space in an organization. If you get busy, there's no time to think. It's like the last thing we want to do is spend time to talk about what we need to do. And the problem with that is it actually creates an unintentional culture that's aligned to inattentiveness. So the first solution is regular team discussions, making space. Now you have to use the time wisely, but if you're interested in trying to introduce an intentional culture, review your culture. That's the number one most important thing. Identify what rules exist. Consider the behaviors and whether they match the rules. If they don't, you might need to think about creating new rules. If there's a vision culture gap, you might need to think, how do we attend to that? Because that's going to continue to create distrust if we don't address that. If you don't have colleagues who trust each other, and there's a sense that actually we're not working effectively together, then that might be one of the unspoken rules, is don't trust. Not safe to trust. Or it might be, well, we come up with ideas and we just get shot down, so why bother? So big part of this process is about discussing together whether or not these ideas are accepted, whether or not you can create new rules. Now, this may not always be easy because there may be a lack of trust or there may be a fear of conflict. And that's where this particular model works really well, is because you can use any different part of the 5 essential functions at any one time.
Yeah. So there's a couple of points in comments there about sort of relevant to it, about successful organizations having to align their vision and culture, embraced by the exec team, and also a really practical example of the VT compliance. So there's a few things wrapped up in that, I think, that from what we've observed. Things change over time. So this isn't a static process. You don't produce a perfect culture and then it's fit for purpose, because obviously the challenges and context will change over time. Members of the team might change. So there's a whole cycle to this to keep it under review. And one easy thing to do is at stand-ups meetings, celebrate the values and ask people to come forward and say, well, I lived this value this week by, and tell their story. That can be really helpful at reinforcing it. And that was something that happened in IHI. They have the vision and values on pillars in the office, and they all sort of talked about them openly, but also sense checked. Are they still fit for purpose, or have we changed in our goals? Because if the goals change, the vision and the values may need to change as well. Not always, but they may do.
But
So
you might have a culture that supports that, though, Andy. And, you know, I suppose the question is there psychological safety enough to be able to say that? You know, what if I come out and I say something vulnerable? Would that be heard well? Would that be dismissed? So can we have the next slide, please, Anthony?
Yeah, can I just chuck this in just before I forget? Last week I ran a Genie on I created a Genie frame specifically to do a culture sort of baseline review. And your first bullet point on that slide just made me reflect on that and think we might be able to work together to build one that's specifically around your model, so that you could do that test effectively without even asking anybody. You just run it on, you can run it on meeting notes, just transcripts from meetings. And then you can gauge from that how that culture is, because it does pull out, actually, it looks like there's a real trust issue in here.
Oh, yeah.
It looks like the psychological safety issues in here. So that could be part of your solution going forward.
We've developed an organizational health check assessment against all 5 essential team functions that actually draws out where team members exist. And we've developed an insights report that can be sort of read to sort of understand that. And so you can quickly identify where the issues and what do we need to do about it. So it might be that there are issues with trust or psychological safety. And so that gives you a starting point. But again, it may be that you can't directly talk about that because of the lack of trust. So what to do next? So the next step would be to think about a different function, because they all lead back to each other. So the next slide is about psychological safety, and it's about how do we do that? What are the components to that? We can wax lyrical even about having psychological safety and how important it is. It's about being free to speak openly without fear of conflict or that we all respect each other. But it's not just a simple process. It's not just something that you can magic into being. It starts with these 7 things, and you have to work through that. And it may very well be that we can't talk about the psychological safety aspect of it because we don't have it. So the next step might be then to move into a team alignment stance, which would be the next slide.
Right.
Yeah. So, I mean, one of the bits that we've got are tools that will help teams to have that conversation in a safe way, because we assume that there may be other dysfunctions throughout the sort of stack, if you like, or the cycle. And as Matthew was sort of suggesting there, if psychological safety doesn't exist, how do you even start to have that conversation that will get you to the point that you understand why and can do things about it? So the team alignment module, if you like, helps getting into those sort of conversations about knowing yourself, knowing others in the team, how to build that trust, understanding the relational dynamics at play, but also gives a safe framework to look at sort of like assumed rules and absolutes that may need to be challenged. Also looking at things like habituation. So sometimes things just happen because that's the way it's always been done. So how do you break that down if it's no longer the best way of doing things? One of the other really interesting ones is a trust orientation matrix, which you can use regularly on specific issues. Other things where you can align yourself to your colleagues and say, how close do we think we're aligned on this problem, and how much do I trust that I'll get support for taking the actions I need to take, but how much do I trust that other people will be taking the actions that they need to take to get us forward? And almost doing that in a nice way in a room or on a chart with dots, it can really illuminate different tensions within teams, and that can help foster a different type of conversation that might be adversarial without it, but overall can be discussed. So there's lots of different things that we can do on that to help with identifying and getting people together.
And in many ways, I think it's about the dynamic nature of this model, in that we can go at it a number of different ways. There's tools that can help support those conversations, but it's the conversations that are most important, because if we can create new ways of thinking about how we work together, we can start to become aligned towards delivering a better, more effective service, which I think most people, if not everyone, wants to be able to achieve.
So we just got an interesting point there, Matthew, in chat from Jeanette about nominated others, and I'm going to interpret that as freedom to speak up. So freedom to speak up is an important part of any organisation, so that there is a safe route. But I always think of it, when I was growing up, my mum used to have a nice pressure cooker, and there was always a little weighted valve on top that would keep the steam inside and maintain the pressure. But if it got too much, there was a release. And I think the freedom to speak up sort of processes and nominated others, that is very much that release. And it's a signal that if that system's being used, there probably is an issue with psychological safety.
Yeah. And I think, the idea of a nominated other to be able to speak up is really important, but it has to be accepted. If immediately rejected, like, no, we're not doing that, then what's the problem there? So one of the ways that we've defined the space of maybe a nominated other is to invite the devil's advocate, where you actually invite someone to take an opposing view so that you can have a healthy, productive challenge. Because oftentimes you might have someone who might speak openly and challenge things in a way that might not always go down well. But if you've invited the devil's advocate, you've invited that position, and in many ways it's about rotating it through so that everyone has a chance. So it's not just one person who's always opposed to an idea. And there's other ways of thinking about this. I think there's the 6 hats, and having different roles for meetings to have these conversations. But absolutely, if we can nominate someone or have someone who's open enough to be able to speak about challenges, it makes a big difference.
Absolutely.
I think there's a really good one, a bit like 6 thinking hats, is if you nominate somebody to look at body language and look at how uncomfortable certain people are in a meeting, and then it's their job to say, Sarah, I can see that there's something troubling you there. There's something not right. Can you tell us how you're feeling at the moment? It just teases that out, because you can tell when people are trying to say something and they can't get a word in, or they really disagree with something. I think that's a really good way to do it as well.
So let's imagine we're having these conversations just in a workspace. What we're doing by having these conversations is we're not just addressing the situation, but we're also building an intentional culture of attentiveness. We're actually building an intentional culture that focuses on, these are important things that we need to look at to be better at what we do. So already you're moving into creating new rules, new behaviors, new values, all that are aligned to the task at hand. If that makes sense.
Yeah. I guess the barometer's that first slide 8, wasn't it? With those 4 elements of, this is what this is how we do things around here. Yeah. And if things are not aligned to that, then these other elements you can draw in to help you fix them.
Absolutely.
It's making sense.
Great. So just the next slide, if you don't mind. So our 4th solution is about really maximizing your team structure. Teams have all sorts of complexities within them, whether that's the hierarchy, the power differentials, the subgroups, the alliances, and even the decision-making process. And we can often fall into the trap of thinking that we can't change that. That's just the way it is, because that's just the way it's always been, which is almost the definition of an unintentional culture. So if we can redefine our structure as it relates to, and lots of different types of hierarchies that are effective, But we can start to move into that space where it's like we can be more effective. We don't have to be a command and control. We could be a flatter hierarchy, or we could be more flexible in different approaches. This is sometimes aligned to roles and skills, and we don't always maximize the skills that everybody has. And I think that's where, one of our tools is a skills audit, where you're able to identify who's good at what, who's interested in what, and does that make a difference? I was working with a team once where one of the nurses had to do her tissue viability risk assessment every Friday. And she said she hated it. It was the worst thing for her. It would make her whole week just wrong. And because it started on a Monday, dreading the Friday, and we were talking about this, and one of her colleagues said, I love doing that. I would love to do that. So they switched roles. They just switched roles, and it changed the team morale overnight. It was dramatic. And I think it's how do we structure our teams to be the best that they can be, whilst also addressing team dynamics, which I think is what you were talking about, Anthony, about naming behaviors, recognizing certain processes. And we can go into a bit more detail around that. The 5x5 model breaks that down in a little bit more detail, so you can get into the nuance behind why we do what we do.
Yeah. And one of the bits that we've done here is looking at different viable management frameworks that people can apply. So a lot of time, management is either just hierarchical or in functional lines, and there are other options out there that perhaps don't often get talked about. And it's not about it has to be this way, it has to be right for the team, but often the selections from a very sort of short menu, if you like. So part of it, we've gathered some really useful tools to help do that. And once you've decided to make a change, what are the options that are available? And a couple of comments in chat there. So I think this was about psychological safety, linking back to culture. I think that's a good observation. All of the things interlink. And Matthew's favourite word is multimodal, which I've come to understand as it all works together. And a couple of other bits there about sort of the devil's advocate. And you can build that into processes as well, not just conversations, thinking about red teaming or pre-mortems and all that kind of stuff about how a project or a change could go wrong and what would you do about that.
I would just add a quick one about once you've got this team structure working properly, you can broaden it out and have more diverse views. And the more diverse views we've got coming into those decision-making processes, the better. Absolutely.
This is where innovation lies. If we can be flexible and agile, we become far more responsive.
That one. That's a good book for diverse ideas. If you ever need one. Not my book.
And I'll just remind everybody in the audience, we've got 10 minutes left for you to add any thoughts and contributions and how we can improve things with this model in Insight Genie now. So just find that link next to my name somewhere and feed in what you think you like about this, what's really great and what you think we could improve. That'd be fun.
I mean, that last point is a good problem. The NHS has always been a bit of a football really between political public intent, and we try to sort of like produce safety cultures, and that's fundamental in terms of being able to raise issues. And I think there's a broader societal thing there about, well, how do we deal with that? Because aiming for perfection is as dangerous as tolerating poor practice. So there's something about what are the excellent standards we should expect, and how do we support services when they might fall short.
Yeah. And that brings us to our fifth solution, which is collaborative goal setting, because we do need to pay attention to what it is we're working for, and so often we can have arbitrary goals that we think we're working towards, that have meaning, but they don't really. And so, but the idea of setting collaborative goals isn't just about having KPIs or working towards, sort of what we expect to achieve. It can also be about what do we need to improve in terms of our organizational culture? How do we set collaborative goals together? So again, this comes back to the relationships, having the conversations, because if you're not having collaborative conversations, you're not going to get commitment from everybody all together. And if you don't do that, then you're almost misdirected anyway. You're not aligned, and you start to, again, move back into some of these dysfunctions of a team.
I know they're multimodal, picking up the new phrase that I'm going to learn as well. But my instinct would be the collaborative goals would be number one. I know they're all interjoined, but did you not think about that one being number one, or was that part of the discussion? Or
well, it's if you think of it more like a circle, you know, where you can start anywhere. It doesn't have to be at the top. It doesn't have to be at the bottom. You start anywhere. I think Andy and I agree that goal setting is often the most important one to start with. That can actually start to create the space where you think together, where you discuss together. And it may be that in that process of trying to identify what are we working towards, why are we doing this, that you start to find conflict or disagreement or challenge, or there's aspects of the interaction where someone's been dismissive about someone's idea. Oh, that'll never work. And you know, they fall silent, you know. So you can start to really get at some of the processes that stand behind these interactions. That's the culture. So we can look at culture through goal setting. We can look at culture through defined team structure. We can look at culture through any of the other dysfunction or the essential team functions. I think that's the dynamic nature of this way of working. Is it doesn't have to be start here and go down. It could be start anywhere. It all leads back to each other, as long as you're focused on each aspect of these essential functions.
Yeah, it may be the first. Sorry, it may be the first goal is we would like to build an intentional culture, and that may not be agreed upon across everybody. That might not be perceived as an issue. So that's why we kind of gravitated towards that. I think if you've got an agreement to do that across a team or an organisation, then there may be other things that you've got a bit more insight into. Well, actually, we kind of struggle with, you know, our team dynamics, or we kind of struggle with our how we organise ourselves as an organisation. So, and that can be tested.
Yeah, this one is a massive one for me, the goal setting one. I think the root of many of our problems and our silos and our dysfunctional management is all related to this one. So for me, maybe it's a midlife crisis thing, but for me, if we have a goal, like a collaborative goal of it is the patient, what are we trying to do here? We're trying to save lives, and we all really feel that, it makes everything so much easier. So we can all come to the table with a particular problem, and we're no longer looking at it from the perspective of, well, my idea is the best. It's, you know, I'm happy for my idea to be the worst, as long as that patient gets the best possible treatment. You know, who cares whose idea is the best?
Yeah,
and I just think it's transformational once you get to that level.
And it can be, and I think part of the, you know, is being open to discuss these ideas means that we can challenge them, we can innovate, we can think of new ideas. It's really, really important. I think one of the questions that's in the chat is, how do you make sure goal setting does not contain a preset solution? That's about really moving into, we call it expansive goal setting. It's about really getting into the bigger picture. What is it that we're working towards? What's our strategic objective? What are we actually doing here? What does that involve? What are the challenges that we face? And there's lots of tools and frameworks you can use around that, you know, SWOT analysis, PESTEL analysis, but then you have to narrow it down. And so you're almost starting with a fresh view of what it is that you're facing and how do you go about it. But most importantly, with any goal setting process, you have to routinely evaluate it. You have to continually look at it to make sure that you're improving. Because if you're not, then you're potentially creating an unintentional culture that's inattentive of the results.
So, and I think the other point about goals, they are often nebulous. So they sit alongside visions with me in terms of how nebulous they are. So I might set a goal for myself, or I might set a goal with others. And for myself, I might have a personal goal to improve my health and fitness. I've not defined what that means, but I may then set outcomes which help me define what that means and reasonable timescales that do that. And I might undertake activities which create capabilities that I didn't have as outputs that allow me to deliver those outcomes. So the goal setting piece is the bit that's a bit nebulous, and it should be done collaboratively in organisations. What are we about? And that often strongly aligns to vision and values, which is why we're back into the cycle of it's not just the one. It has to be the all that they're in balance.
Yeah, fantastic. Next slide.
Yeah, sure. So if these ideas interest you and you feel like, yes, creating an intentional culture is important, we've developed guidebooks for each of these essential team functions. which if you're interested, get in touch with us today. I think that's the next slide, actually, Anthony.
Yeah.
So those are, they go into more detail, some of the theory behind the ideas, and so do get in touch. Use the QR code. You can sign up for the guidebooks or just email us.
I'm just sprinkling a Susan of tools.
Yeah. Take a screenshot of that. I would recommend. Take a screenshot of that. Fantastic.
It will get you straight through. If you use your camera, it should get you straight through to the website.
Yeah, great stuff. And then I'll bring us back to us. There we go. So my first thing, I'm not going to get a chance to actually do my inputting into Insight Genie, but I'll just verbally do it. Is I feel like I want a book. So I think that needs to be your next little task.
Person to say that.
We're working on that. That's in development.
Excellent. So no time frames yet. I know these things can take longer than you think.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So, is there any chats that you would like me to bring up for you to dig in a bit deeper on? I think Alex has just put the last one in, so I'll bring that one up.
Yeah, they definitely. I think I always we used to talk about thresholds, and I think that's the better way of doing it, because you do create a pass-fail and a sense of, and once people have failed, they're more likely to prioritize other things rather than continue to try to achieve. Whereas if it's a threshold, it can be something that people will exceed and continue to exceed because it's working. And so I think, that binary nature of pass-fail is not a great way of setting goals. They should be broader than that, and then linked to deliverable outcomes with timescales and thresholds, I would say, rather than targets. Good point, Alex.
Are you ready for a challenge?
There you go. We've got 2 customers.
Yeah, great. So if you're interested in a book, well, it's in process, but the guidebooks, sort of set the basis for that. So do get in touch about those, because... and
the guidebooks are free. We're just giving those away because we want to spread the love.
Good point. Very good point. Are you ready for a challenging question now?
Love a challenge.
So Wes Streeting's speech last week, 10 days ago or something like that, is introducing these targets that all the trusts are going to be governed by. Back to my point earlier around walking the talk and leaders absolutely showcasing the culture that we want. What's the tension that you see there? Because I guess we're talking about flex targets and things so that the culture can be right, so we can be inclusive, we can listen to the front line, we can make better decisions, better solutions. But actually, if our focus is on set targets and that's driving us, we all know that can create really, really gamed and dysfunctional behaviour. And that's completely in contrast with the culture we're trying to build here, isn't it?
Well,
so
I looked at that and saw the fallout from it and just thought, we've forgotten what we learned. We had the Kia review of the NHS and Don Berwick's report, and that was really, really clear about how arbitrary setting of targets creates a problematic culture where the target is hit but the point's completely missed. And that was what underpinned the mid-staff's problems. So I think there is something there about pushing back on our political leadership to say, we already understand that that's a really bad idea. Yeah. And there's these things that we did to understand why it was a really bad idea. And Don Berwick came up with solutions that we could implement to do things differently but still achieve that excellence. So I think for us as a leadership in the NHS, we've got a challenge to go back and say, that's probably not a great idea. And we could probably be even stronger than that, because we've got 3 reports which tell us it definitely isn't, and what will happen if you do it.
Yeah, it's a good point. Yeah. It's probably another event to have around, okay, what's the solution to actually making that happen?
Yeah.
How do we actually do that? That's a good solution we need to develop.
Yeah, I mean, I think when you were looking at the NHS as a whole, it's we have to look at it from the political side, yes, but can we look at it more interdepartmentally, for example, within individual trusts, I think when we create a culture of competition, and we strive to to do that, well, that doesn't always align to what's in the best interest of the patient. And if we're striving towards these arbitrary targets, yes, we've done that. We've seen 55 people, but we haven't moved them from the hallway. What is it that we're actually trying to do? So I think focusing on individual trusts is far easier than thinking about it as a whole. At the moment, I wish we could easily just sort of wipe the slate clean and say, let's start over. But as Andy points out, there have been clear indications about what doesn't work, yet we still are being told this is what we should be doing. Doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
I'm not averse to trying something again, but when there's so much evidence that's all interlinked.
Yeah. This latest chat from Joanne is music to my ears, because that's what we're all about. It's these light bulb moments that enable us to see different ways of doing things so we can move forward and progress and do different things, because just keep doing the same things over and over is never going to generate these reforms that we desperately need. So that's fab.
Great.
I'm going to leave you guys for a minute just to go through other comments whilst I go and just check the Insight Genie report. I'll bring myself out for a minute.
Is it bubbling away in the pot? So we'll have a look there. So there's a couple of bits there, and domestic assessment approach agreed. I think we still do, and we looked at the aviation industry, didn't we, for how they deal with incidents and harm, and the positive impact that's had on flight safety. So that never events are pretty much never events now. If we want to get there with healthcare, we have to take the same approach. And I think the right things are often said, but the wrong behaviour is implemented. And predominantly, that's driven by target culture. Yeah, because they don't often align with the important things around quality and improvement. And I always keep the STEEP, STEEP to heart. So around quality, so safe, timely, effective, efficient, and patient orientated. So, and I've forgotten E in there, but forgive me, I'm trying to talk. Well, anything that resonates with you, Matthew?
Well, I think, again, you come back to behavior. It's like, how do we behave? And that's fundamentally part of the culture. We have to look at the behaviors that are acceptable or not acceptable, and address it accordingly. And, if part of that behavior is to indicate that something doesn't work, and to continue to do that, that strikes me as very odd, and what's the true intention? Yeah. So I think in many ways, we can look at this as at a macro level, and if we were able to get a sea change of multiple NHS organisations all moving towards the same thing at the same time, then might we start to see true organisational change? Yes, I would. But I suppose Sue's comment about where would you start? Well, I suppose that would depend on each individual organisation.
So I think we've got to sort of get over the NHS as a monolithic organisation. It's a promise, and we've got a constitution which makes that promise. Have we been clear about each organisation's individual contribution to that promise? And I don't think we have. I think it is viewed very much as hierarchical, top-down missives from the centre, which constrain local freedoms to get on, and that is the wrong way around, and it's a misinterpretation of command and control. There should be clear things. Thank you very much. Which one is equitable? I missed the third E. Thank you. I think the command and control bit should be about setting the standards that we all need to live by, setting the broader goals that we need to achieve. But the control should be at the point that we're enacting those actions and activities which will generate outputs and outcomes, create capabilities, and get us through to the outcomes that we delivered. And I noticed Linda's on the call, so I pinched capabilities from you, Linda, because I liked it.
Mm-hmm. Brilliant. So it has run. I'm just going to add an extra bit of verbal from me because I didn't get a chance to type mine in. I'm really impressed by it. I mean, we've talked, haven't we, Matthew, a long time ago about the 5 dysfunctions of a team and how for both of us it's like a Bible. I think it's brilliant. And how you've developed that into the practical elements of this thing's going wrong. Right, here are the practical tools to help us guide us through that. I think it's genius. I guess if I had my hospital trust hat on, I'd be thinking, can you guys support me with this stuff? So the pamphlets and the freebies are going to be great, but is there any support? And I guess they'd be the things that I would have added in if I'd have had chance to do the entry. I'll share the screen in a minute, just quickly show you the report, but I'll send you the report afterwards so you've got proper time to review it, and hopefully it'll add value for you.
If that would have been a question for you, there's a link on the website to the consultancy offer, so that we will work with teams and do that, because I know it's a lot to take in, and we also have put together a training plan so that people can learn how to do this and take it a bit further. And we were thinking about accreditation and things like that, so that people could almost get a badge to say that they've done it, because I think at the back of our minds, it's a bit like what Lean does for process redesign. These 5 essential functions should do for human interaction, and that is particularly for us as a service-led industry, is really, really important. It's not about cogs and production lines; it's about how people interact, and that does include patients and the public that we're here to serve. So.
Yeah, brilliant. So I'll just add for the video recording as well. If anybody is watching this and thinking, oh, there's a particular element that we would love to drill into on culture, and you'd want any of the teams that are speaking at these events to come back, then let us know. Direct message me on LinkedIn, and we can set up multiples of these. If you're happy to do it, Matthew and Andrew, we can do another one of these, drilling on a particular area if people want to.
Absolutely. Have a look at the guidebooks, and if there's anything in there that we need to sort of drill down on as well, that'd be really helpful, because it can be really complicated, and we want to make it as accessible as possible so that people can really engage with it.
Yeah, fantastic.
Super. So if you want the guidebooks, do register through our website, just so we can keep track of that. Otherwise, we won't be able to send them to you.
Yeah, brilliant. And then I will just bring quickly that one.
Is this the Genie bit?
So this is the Genie bit. The problem with us doing it within 20 minutes or so is that we don't get hundreds of responses. I think what we might do on some of these sessions is set them up sort of a month in advance with a clear topic, so that we as a team can go through that in the session and pull more out of it, rather than just whizzing through it super fast like this. But you can see that there's the context that we set up linked to this event. The exec summary is 75 out of 100 in terms of the sentiment. So the people that have responded in this very short time frame, they're positive, which I think we'd expect, because it's brilliant work that we absolutely need. We've got top 5 insights there. I'll send this through to you guys so you can go through it, and it'll hopefully help you in terms of development of your solution. Quick wins. I'm sure this is going to be interesting, even though we've only had a few people respond. And then we're getting into the views of the solution, challenges embedding cultural change, which is what you're all about. Your solution's all about, is supporting that process. About the impacts of the weaknesses. There'll be some really interesting stuff in here, no doubt. A lot of it, you live this day in, day out, so it won't be new to you, but there could be some nuggets in here that make you think, okay, the target market is thinking like this. That's interesting for us to understand, so that we can communicate in a better way.
Of course, what we want is this to be an effective and useful solution. Because really, at the end of the day, that's what's important. And the model is created in such a way that it evolves. It will evolve over time.
Absolutely, in the same way that cultural teams will.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And context will.
The website, if you want it, is www.the5x5model.com.
And the 5's the numbers, not words. And the by is an X. 5 times 5.
Yeah, I'll just bring it back up for everybody just before we finish up. I will.
And if you have a camera on your smartphone, if you snap the QR code, it should take you straight to that link.
Just bring it back up. So we've had some good chat today on the LinkedIn chat area and the comments area. So really appreciate that, guys. It makes the session more interactive and lively, which is brilliant, which is what these are all about. So use your phone for that, or take a screenshot, and we're in business. So we're absolutely bang on time. Yeah. If there's any other questions, we've got a couple of minutes if anybody wants to put any more questions in the chat that we can chat through. It's good that people are feeling about there's a helpful session, because that's what these are all about. Let's try and make a difference and make these reforms actually happen.
I'm grateful for the thoughtful questions as well, and happy that people have had some light bulb moments, because I'm with Anthony on that one. It's a shame. I love it in a room when you can see some sparks fly. It's great. So,
see people's eyes go to the back of the head. You know you've done something good.
Everybody likes a bit of self-validation.
Yeah.
Thanks everyone for coming and contributing. It's been a brilliant session.
Yeah, and I'd probably, Matthew and Andrew, I'd probably recommend if you go to the comments section in the LinkedIn area in the event, you can share your website link in there.
Yeah.
And probably just feedback to anybody's questions, just give them a reply.
Yeah.
And I guess for everybody, the LinkedIn area is good for keeping a record of everybody that's attended, so you know the different people around LinkedIn that are interested in this topic. So there might be somebody in your trust that you didn't know was interested in this stuff. You could figure that out and liaise with them and start working with them and that sort of stuff. So brilliant. We've got enough time for a cup of tea before the 1 o'clock meeting kick in. Thanks everyone. Really enjoyed it.
We need to sort.
Yeah. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Anthony.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.